do that. And welcome, Aaron. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Bronwyn. I appreciate being hyped up like that. That's great. Because, of course, you were going to be hearing from our director this morning, who, is much more accomplished at having given these talks. So I appreciate the hype, you being my hype man today. So I am going to share screen now, pop into our slideshow. And apologies because I have two monitors because I'm at work because it's a better computer. So, don't worry about my little face in the corner. Focus on the screens and me looking the sideways. So this PowerPoint, though, was put together by Lindsay Jacks, our coordinator. She's been running Lights Out Baltimore, I want to say, for 10 years now. I got involved first in the spring of 2014. I actually knew Lindsay when she first moved to Baltimore. We used to be colleagues at Center Stage together. And so I knew she was involved with something that had to do with bird conservation, right? And then another longtime volunteer of Lights Out is, up until earlier this summer, was a Baltimore-based artist named Lynn Parks, a photographer. And she was one of the Baker Artist Award winners in 2013, if you've heard of the Baker Artist Awards. And part of being chosen and receiving that award is getting an exhibit with the other Baker winners. So there's usually 3 in a year. And so I want to say in January of 2014, the Baker exhibition was on at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and Lynn's work was part of it. And she photographs birds, specimens that she's collected as a Lights Out volunteer. So from hearing from Lindsay about a little bit about what the organization was involved in, and then really seeing Lynn's photos cemented for me, and suddenly, a light bulb went off, and I thought, oh, now I understand what's happening. Now I understand that window collisions are actually a huge issue. And I put those two things together and I said, oh, okay, well, when you next start doing this, please let me join you on a walk. So Lindsay and her fiance, now husband, picked me up early one Saturday morning and took me down. And I can remember vividly finding the first bird during that shift, which was, now I remember the bird. I remember finding the bird, but I'm not remembering the bird. It was either a mockingbird or it was a cuckoo. On its back, wings spread out at the convention center, and I was hooked. And so from that day on, I have been a very frequent volunteer. So now I'll get off the first slide. But you can see here, we do art, we rescue bats, we rescue birds. That's our main work. All right, why is my advance not working? Okay, hold on. There we go. So why Lights Out? Why the name Lights Out? Light pollution, right? I mean, some of you already know birds navigate at night and they use light to navigate on their migratory paths. We're really concerned with the migratory birds, what I call local birds. I don't know if that's right. That's not a scientific term, obviously, but the birds that are here year round are much less, they strike the windows much less frequently. So this is really about migratory birds. And you can see, nocturnal, this NASA image, nocturnal lights from the urban centers and how disruptive it is for the birds. This slide shows you how the light pollution has changed over the years and a projection for where it'll be in a few years from now. And of course, you can tell where we are right in the mid-Atlantic in a huge white concentration of light. So the birds are navigating, they're using light. With the light pollution, they can't use the regular light they would have used, stars and the night sky. So the light attracts them into these urban centers, and they're attracted to these buildings where the lights are. So we focus our work on the downtown corridor, but any building with a light and with a large pane of glass is a problem. I'm not sure what time of year, if Lindsay keeps this slide in all the time, she's got it in for this. Obviously, we just had the anniversary, right, of 9/11 and the commemoration. And every year they do the tribute in light. But this is a powerful image because it shows you all the migratory birds that get attracted to those high-powered beams of light. And once they get in it, they get stuck in it, right? So now the organizers know this, and they work with New York City Audubon. So these lights are turned off every 20 minutes to allow the birds to disperse, because otherwise they would exhaust themselves by continually staying in the light. So it's a compelling image, but that's in New York. Maybe you all heard about earlier this week, New York also had a mass casualty event of migratory birds. It was not because of the tribute. That was last Saturday. The event happened on Tuesday. And though ironically, it was at the World Trade Center complex that hundreds of birds were perished there on Tuesday. So it was all over social media. You might have heard about it. So it's the combination of light and glass, right? The photo here on the left, you can see that is actually one of Lynn's images. I think it may have been one of the ones that was on display in that Baker exhibit. So, very compelling. And that's what drove it home for me, mostly because I had never seen a scarlet tanager before. I'm not a birder. I'm still not a birder. I've been volunteering for 8 years. I've never gone on a bird walk. I can't tell a bird from its call. I'm horrible at that. I can tell a cardinal when it peeps, and I can tell house finches because those are the only birds I get, along with house sparrows, on my window bird feeder, because I live downtown and I don't have a yard. So I'm not a typical volunteer, right? I didn't have a pre-existing emotional connection to birding, but I was so fascinated by the images and the phenomenon of what's happening that that's what drew me to get involved. And we also do rescue bats when we find them, right? They're not our primary focus, but they're susceptible to glass as well. So just in terms of numbers, right? How big of an issue is this? Well, most of the Lights Out programs, right? We do focus on downtown business districts, or there are a lot of programs on college campuses, right? Where there's new buildings, lots of glass. But actually, high-rise buildings are less than 1% of the fatalities each year. But they just happen to provide, right, the density for volunteer programs like ours to actually do the work. Much more are low-rise buildings, which is actually probably more typical of Baltimore's downtown. Our high rises are not necessarily the issue. But residential actually accounts for a huge portion of the estimated annual fatalities. But this shot of the convention center kind of gives you a glimpse as to why there's a challenge, right? Where the photo taker is positioned is in an alcove that has a glass wall, and then it looks through, right, the huge open lobby with the escalators that you take up there. If you've ever been to the convention center, that's the Charles Street entrance. And then there's, just an entire wall of glass on the other side with trees. So the birds think that's open space. They're flying through, and they slam into that alcove window. Actually, we, the volunteers, call it the alcove of death, which is a little macabre, right? But the reason we call it that is because that is a source for a lot of casualties. Not so much anymore, though. They've made some changes there. So also, when you combine the light and the glass, sometimes you don't even really need the light. You just have daylight. It's the reflective nature, right? The birds don't see the glass. They see foliage and a great place to alight, right? So this is where the reflective nature really poses the problem. So there's 3 slides here about what the problems are. So open pathways, that, again, these also represent, similar to that photo I just described at the convention center. If there's glass on 2 sides and there's not really anything in between, so whether in the middle there, it's like on the corner, and then, you know, the other two photos show you. So, right, birds are not going to perceive that. So they will just slam right into it. Then you have the reflection, which I mentioned with that other photo. But again, you can see not really, it's just reflecting the sky and the foliage around it, and even trees that are far away. That first photo kind of shows you that there's the trees right there that are the orange with the orange leaves, but the other trees in the center are not even in the field of the camera view. And then even things such as, right, elevated walkways, small kiosks, and in particular in Baltimore, the other two aren't so much an issue. Glass railings, that's an architectural element where we find a fair number of casualties here in Baltimore, particularly downtown at the Charles Center complex. So with Lights Out Baltimore specifically, here's a little bit about us, right? We're a program of the Baltimore Bird Club, which is the local chapter of the Maryland Ornithological Society. So we're not an independent organization, but we're an independent project of the Bird Club. But that is, of course, a nonprofit, just like the Natural History Society. So we do receive funding, and we can receive special donations. Like of course, I contribute and earmark my contribution directly for Lights Out. We use our funding for supplying supplies for first-time volunteers. You know, you get a net and some other supplies that we use with rescues, but we also award grants to buildings that want to do mitigation projects, right, to treat their glass. So we don't have a ton of funds, right, for that, but we have awarded some grants, or I guess it's not really awarding a grant because it's not to a fellow nonprofit, but we have paid for some mitigation projects and contributed to that. So the program has been running since 2008. It's all volunteers, right? Nobody is paid staff. We're one of 25 larger scale sort of city focused Lights Out programs. A lot of other cities also call their program Lights Out, or their organization Lights Out. A lot of them are projects of Audubon or other wildlife conservation programs in various cities. A few cities have their own independent organizations. Really sort of the grandfather of them is called Fatal Light Awareness Project, or FLAP. They're based in Toronto, where being right there on Lake Erie, Ontario. Now I can't remember which. I think they're on Lake Erie, actually, right? It's a huge issue in Toronto and other cities. In Baltimore, our volume is less, but when we do have heavy days, it can be really significant. But there are some days, for instance, I actually walked this morning. I had 4 fatalities this morning and 1 rescue. So 5 birds in about a 6-mile loop. So I monitor about 50 buildings total. So that's more of a typical day. In fall is heavier than in spring, right? Because there are more birds on the move. Because all of the fledglings, right, are migrating for the first time. So spring, a typical spring day could be, 1 or 2 birds. So in addition to doing the monitoring walks that we do, we also encourage, right, the businesses, the property owners, the property managers of these buildings, the city, with the convention center and the visitor center, to take steps. The Lights Out pledge, what that means is, right, they'll turn out non-essential lighting. Richard and Ellen, right before we started, you were saying this, you could probably give this talk to somebody as well, right? It's about turning out the non-essential lights, right? It's going to benefit the properties because they're going to cut their utility bills. And it does have a dramatic impact on the number of casualties that will hit the building. And when I say casualty, I don't just mean dead, I mean dead or injured. Also
benefits the climate too.
Exactly, right. It's sort of a no-brainer, right? It's such a no-brainer that's why, of course, nobody does it, because it's so simple and would be so helpful. I'm a little bit of a cynic, as you might tell. And then we like I said, we already talk to people about treating their glass, taking mitigation steps. We also, with varying degrees of success, right, have tried outreach to the city council. We also join with partners statewide in Annapolis each session to try to pass legislation, right, to put in bird safe legislation, essentially, so that future buildings that get built will be done with bird conservation in mind. So the photo here, I think, is pretty compelling. I'll just spend a second about it. We took this idea from Flap. So Flap in Toronto every year collects all of their birds and then arranges them and does a pretty amazing media capture of all of the fatalities to drive home the issue, right? Like, one photo of one bird can be compelling, particularly if it's an unusual bird, right, or a rare species. But when you put them all together, it really drives home, right, the scale of the issue. So we tried it ourselves in 2014. It's a big undertaking, though. The birds really can only be out of the freezer for 3 hours before they start to decompose. And of course, we don't want them to decompose because we save them and take them to the Smithsonian, who determines if there are any specimens that would be appropriate for their collection, or in some years we have researchers at Hopkins who use them for tissue, and of course they need fresh tissue. It can't also have started to break down either. So in 2018 and 2019 is the study, the most recent time when we were donating birds. So this photo actually, this is what I would call the beginner route. So this is probably if you decided you wanted to volunteer, this would be the route you were probably given and told. So you can see there's maybe 18 buildings on this. So like I said, I'm now up to 50 because I walk from Mount Vernon, where I live, downtown. So I hit the Walters with that huge 4-story glass lobby facade on Center Street. I hit the Pratt Library, which is not really a problem, but occasionally has ones. And then I get to the Charles Center Complex, et cetera. So I typically will look at almost any building that's on my way down and back. But I didn't want you to be intimidated by the sound of 50 buildings in a 3-hour shift. Most people can just do this basic core downtown corridor, and it can take just about an hour. And we fill out each bird we find gets a label. We have the federal salvage permit, which is the important part, right? Technically, you shouldn't touch any wild animal you find, because it's actually illegal for you to even touch it and dispose of it. So we are official in that way. And of course, ultimately, right, research is the point behind a lot of this. Nationally, the research into collisions is led by the Carnegie Museum's Powder Mill Nature Reserve. Actually, I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago now, representatives from Lights Out programs all over the country actually came together, and we met sort of informally for the first time. I was fortunate enough to be asked to go. I was really honored to asked to go by Lindsay and Lynn Parks, and I went. And you can see this trailer is where they test the different glass. I mean, there's a barrier so that the birds won't actually, I think, hurt themselves in it, but they test different variations of innovations in bird window treatments. And then you can see the birds are also tagged there and have those awesome transmitters on the back that I'm told actually cost about $2,000 a piece, which is pretty incredible, but they last, I think, quite some time. And I'm kind of blowing through, so there will be Q&A at the end. And if I finish really early, I also have a couple videos queued up we can watch that are optional. But so for our program, right, so since 2008, we've collected just under 5,500 birds, and that's through spring. So it probably was, well, I know with fall already, I have more than 7 birds. So we've definitely overcome it. 102 different species. You got the breakdown. It's actually, I'm surprised. I would have expected it to be more dead, honestly. So it's about 60% dead and about 40% rescue, it looks like. But the great news is almost 95% of the injured birds we collect do survive and get released. So I myself, this shows you right how much I'm volunteering and why Lindsay thought I could be qualified to give you this talk, right? So of the 5,500, 1,600 are mine that I've found. So I guess that's probably a little under a third. So, but that's pretty good. I feel pretty good about that. And I've found 84 different species. So like I said, maybe if a birder would maybe be excited, right, to have 84 species on their life list. I mean, it's on my life list, but I don't have a real list, but it's pretty great. And we use iNaturalist, which is, a citizen scientist app where people, and it's not just for birds, it's for anything in nature, flora and fauna, where you snap a photo and you upload it and it uses the GPS from the photo to do your location, and it helps and it gives you suggestions. Because for instance, like I said, for me, I mean, now I've gotten pretty good at identifying birds, particularly common species. Like I don't need to look up whether something is an ovenbird. I'm well aware now of what an ovenbird is. Or a house sparrow, or a white-throated sparrow, or a catbird, or a woodcock. But warblers are still pretty tricky for me. And then when you get into some of the more less common sparrows, I can get tripped up. So I still need help. And so I love the app for that reason. But the great thing about the app then is, again, that's data that researchers and actual scientists can use. And a couple years ago, I'll just, to brag on myself for a second, I actually got an acknowledgement in a published study that I had no idea was happening, but because I had uploaded so much data, they named me specifically in the paper. So that was pretty cool. So if you volunteer and you want to get really involved and find a lot, you can get a shout out that way too. So the top 5 for Lights Out, and also my top 5 are the same. These are the species that we find the most of. The order here is my order. I'm not sure what it is for the whole project, because that's something I added to the slide. I will also brag the yellow rail rescue. If you are a birder, I believe the yellow rail was a pretty big thing when it happened in 2016 or 17. Now I'm not remembering again. It was in April, but I am the person who found it and rescued it on my walk. I was by myself. It was at the Wells Fargo building at 7 St. Paul Street. It was really tough to net, and that's not my photo. That's a photo that Kathy Woods, our rehabilitator extraordinaire up at Phoenix Wildlife Center, her husband Hugh is a photographer, and I'm pretty sure he shot that photo. My photo is like just the head sticking out of the net because I was so nervous. And it's also hard when if you're monitoring by yourself, right, to take a picture and get the bird. I also am always nervous about, I don't want to further injure the bird in handling it, right? And they're so delicate. I mean, that's the amazing thing, right? They're so lightweight and kind of marvels of engineering. And I'm always fearful that by my big clumsy Flintstone hands that I'm gonna, further endanger them. But I was the one who found the yellow rail, which was the first verified sighting of a yellow rail in Baltimore City since the 1890s. So again, like if I was a birder, I would probably, be getting free meals from people just on that. But I am told it's a big deal. And actually a coworker of mine, her mom is a birder who lives in Frederick County. And somehow we got to talking about this. And she's like, oh, my mom was saying like she was just going nuts about this bird. And I'm like, was it a yellow rail? And she said, yes. And I said, that was me. So I felt that was pretty cool, right? So I'm a minor celebrity for that. Not to ignore, of course, that we do occasionally find Orioles, which are probably the hardest thing for us to find right here in the city because it's our city mascot. All right. Like I said, we also rescue bats. I think I have had 3 species, 3 of those, eastern red, silver haired, and actually I found I think it was a big brown, not a little brown. Those are the 3 I've found, but we have pretty high they're almost always alive. I think we've only had a handful of actual casual or dead bats that we couldn't help. But these are trickier, right? Not every volunteer will go about collecting these because, other than Lindsay, because she, in her prior job, she worked at the National Aquarium in the Australian exhibit. So she worked with birds and was, in the zookeeper. So she has rabies, she's already been vaccinated for rabies. None of the rest of us are, to my knowledge. So it's a little, we don't, obviously you don't have to rescue the bats, but some of us more adventurous will. Of course, we don't handle them. I've never touched one with my hands. We use a variety of objects in our kits to, scoot them into their brown paper bag, which is what we put all the rescues in. Sure, we'll get good. Hopefully those are all great questions in the chat. All right, I'll try to go a little faster though. So now a little bit about what can we do, right? How can you do something at your home, right? Check out your windows, check out your lighting. Are your windows really reflective? Just because you're not finding, right, a dead bird below your window doesn't mean that strikes aren't happening. A lot of birds can recover and fly off on their own. That doesn't mean that they're not going to perish soon afterwards, not in front of your window. A lot of them also will get predated, right, by larger birds or, well, in the city, rats, seagulls down by the harbor. But even the simplest thing you can do, right, just if you have screens, put them on your window. Some people, right, want to take the screens off. But also if you have those large picture windows, that's when you need to treat. So you could also get involved, right? Like with us, create a collision monitoring program, or, if you work in like a business park out in the suburbs and, there may be, depending on how nice it is, there might be a lot of glass windows, you can get together, get involved, or on your school campus, etc. It is always best to put anything you find in a paper bag as opposed to a box. And you just take a binder clip, right? Clip it closed. They can breathe. You don't have to worry about them breathing. You don't have to poke holes in anything. You actually don't ever really want to give them water or any food. They don't need it, right? They're kind of in stress and in shock anyway. So they're not going to be eating or drinking. And you want to use a paper towel in the bottom. If you don't have access to that and you have a napkin or a tissue, that's acceptable, but not ideal. You really don't want a towel or a shirt, because that fabric, you think about towels, they're all tiny little loops of thread, and it's too easy for their little, the little talons to get into and caught on. So you just don't want to stress them out anymore. But actually being in that bag, closed and clipped, it's kind of dark, it's kind of quiet, that helps keep them calm. But most of all, anytime you can, try to take it to a rehabilitator as opposed to letting it sit and recover for a few hours and then setting it loose. I mean, obviously, if you can't get it to a rehabilitator, you should still do that. But obviously, the best thing is always to get it to some care. So examples, right? So you have this great picture window. It doesn't open. It doesn't need a screen. You're not going to buy a screen for it. But what can you do? You could apply these dotted, window stickers. The rule for anything you put on a window, right, is the 2x4 rule. So from vertical elements should be no more than 2 inches apart. And I'm reversing it. Horizontal. I'm thinking it that way. All right. Yes. Okay. Yes. The 2x4. But you get it, right? If the gap of what you treat the window with is wider, it becomes outside of every kind of bird's vision. This will work for every bird. So that's why something like, a figurine of an owl is not going to do anything for window collisions. It might be fun decor, but it's not going to do anything, right? And even just putting a decal, one large decal, really is not going to do anything. It will help that part of the window, but it's not going to solve your issue. And you can do temporary things. So, right, this is great. Chalk, just soap your window, tempera paint, I guess cover glass overnight. I guess maybe that's like hanging a blanket or something. I'm not sure. or just closing the drapes or the blinds even. But these will work, but they are temporary because they don't last forever. Obviously, better to do would be to actually buy film. And these are all different versions of film that works on the window. I believe these, though, what is showing with these bird shapes is actually custom. And those bird shapes were designed by Lynn, I think, and her husband. Lynn Parks and her husband, Chris Siren, who was also a volunteer with us. But those are various companies, and I'm happy to send Bronwyn the PowerPoint and she can share it with you all if you want to capture any of this. All of this too is also on our website, which I'll give you the URL at the end. But here's another example. The Patuxent Research Refuge Visitor Center in Laurel. They didn't have a huge problem, but they did have window collisions. And of course, as a wildlife or, site, they felt awful about that. So, so they partnered with us. What could we do? Lynn and Chris designed all of these different, silhouettes and worked together to have them installed professionally. I mean, this is the ideal, right? This is like the top way to solve your issue, but it's not, it's expensive. It's not inexpensive. But they did a great way, right, of incorporating all the different nature. But now, if you're inside the building, that's what it looks like. Notice you still have a view, you still have light. You're not looking at a big blue and white shadow. So it's pretty technologically advanced. And there's another example of the films and then what it looks like from the inside and how it's not, doesn't impact. And so the dots are more visible, but I don't think they're terrible. I mean, obviously someone is going to do this only if they really love and care about animals anyway, right? So they're probably not going to mind the little bit of dots. If anybody has a hesitation, they're not even going to entertain the idea, right? So we also worked with Irvine Nature Center in Owens Mills. They did, to upgrade their wonderful space out there. And again, what it looks like from the inside looking out. There's also, tape. So again, this works for the vertical. I guess the point is it doesn't have to be a grid. You can have either the 4 inches wide if you have all the vertical, or if you prefer to have the horizontal stripes 2 inches. But again, Lindsay would be the best person to give you the authoritative. And also, this is the very low tech, but this is a product you can buy, Acopian Bird Savers. It's just, small rope. And the spacing is, follows the guidelines and it'll flutter, right? They just hang loose, but these are like, I think as inexpensive as $5 for like one window. You just have to be willing to put up with whatever the impact is of any of these, the aesthetic. So we did work with CCBC Dundalk. These projects were all projects that we worked with them together with the sites. And as far as we know, they're the first college in Maryland to actually commit to doing this work. So some of the other colleges have lights out programs. And then the aquarium, of course, I think with Lindsay being such a high profile person for lights out and having been an employee there for a long time, the aquarium realized they were going to need to invest and make some enhancements, and they have. I think back in 2008, when the program first started, actually there was a problem with casualties at the aquarium. And of course, again, they're in the animal conservation business, right? It's their mission. So they did make changes. They made lighting changes, I think within a year or two. So they have not really been an issue. And they're not a building that I monitor. So that gives you the idea. I started in 2014. So they have not really been an issue, but they've gone even further. I don't know if you've been to the aquarium, but there's this huge, like 3-story glass panel that kind of jutted out the edge of the building, and they've treated their windows, but also that whole window. So here's an example of, like I told you, one decal isn't going to do it, right? That's, they're just, you have to have the spacing. And there are some, powerful images out there to show you what, the impact of the collision. Oh, did I go backwards? No. Okay. So then, right, the real money would be to replace the glass itself, or if you're building a new structure, to put in safe glass. We even saw some of these, I think, being tested at the Carnegie Powder Mill Reserve when we were there a few years ago. So again, there's a lot of options. Also, if you're someone like me, I live in an apartment here in Mount Vernon, right? I don't have a yard. There's no courtyard or anything, but I do have a window bird feeder, and that's perfect. Actually, if you have a bird feeder, you want it to be within 3 feet of your structure. If it's any further away, you're actually endangering the birds, because within 3 feet, they're going to come in and they're landing on that, right? They're coming in to land on that bird feeder. And within the 3 feet, if you have it 3 feet from your window, if they happen to take off towards your window, it's not far enough to apparently like injure them. So that's the rule. I didn't come up with this. I'm just sharing my layman's understanding of it. So, but if the further out you are, then if the bird happens to take off towards your window, right, towards the reflection of the beautiful scenery it's seeing in your window, then it's in danger. So that's a very easy change you can make. And then of course, right, what we're really concerned about downtown is lights. And it's both how the light is oriented, you know, is it shining freely? Is it, you know, how much of the umbrella of the light direction is. So downward facing fixtures are better, you know, as little light as possible, right? Non-essential. It's non-essential. We're not talking about you have, right, a security guard who's working in your building all night and that they can't have any lights on in the lobby, right? It's like, but have a focused area desk light, right? You don't have overhead lights that are lighting up your whole lobby. But really the whole point of today, right, and your community science program is volunteer opportunities. Join the flock. We try to have 2 to 3 people walk every day for the 2 months of migration season. And that is a first shift, which on weekdays starts at 5 a.m. and on weekends starts at 6. And then there is a second shift on days when there is a first shift. And usually I do the second shift. So you walk with a partner if you do first shift, because it's pre-dawn and for safety, we always do pairs. And second shift starting later, it's usually dawn. So you don't really need to have a partner. So that's where the third person comes in. We occasionally will start a little early, maybe the last week of March. You know, sometimes we go late into June. It's really, the birds let us know, right? Usually myself or one of the other more veteran volunteers will do an early walk. I may walk as early as like March 15th, right? To see, is anything moving? Are we finding any casualties? And if we are, we might start earlier, but it's really focused about the 2, right? The spring and fall migration. And then, but you can be a volunteer without walking. We need people to drive. I'm someone, I don't own a car. I live in Mount Vernon. I walk to work, you know, so I don't really ever drive the rescues out to Phoenix. On occasionally I'll get a zip car if I have to. But so we love people who are willing and available to just say, I'll come if there are rescues, and pick them up and drive them out to Phoenix. And occasionally we also get a lot of calls from barks, right? They'll collect injured birds as well, but don't have any transporter network. So they'll sometimes reach out to us. We do outreach events like this. And there's our email. And again, reiterating, this was actually one I found, so I didn't put this in. Lindsay loves this, but this sad, right? This sad photo of this clearly in distress male common yellow throat, and that's him getting released by Kathy a few days later. And again, we've rescued 85 bats. And of course, we couldn't do this without the volunteers, but we really couldn't. I mean, Phoenix Wildlife Center, if you don't know Kathy Woods, maybe she would be somebody to have sometime, even though of course on a Saturday morning, she's probably way too darn busy to meet and do a talk, but she is fantastic. And follow her on social media as well, their accounts. And then on the rare occasions when Kathy and Hugh allow themselves to vacation, we work with Judy at All Creatures Great and Small, and she's a much smaller operation in Columbia. And then again, we're a program of the Baltimore Bird Club. I've probably talked too much, Now questions.
That was great, Erin. Can you come back and we can come back together?
Sure. I'm just going to show you this very last slide. Just so if anybody wants, the main thing, just grab our website, lightsoutbaltimore.org. Everything else you can get to from the website. And this picture here, the lower left, the magnolia warbler, that's this morning. That was the bird I rescued this morning. So I just thought it would be fun to put that in. But yeah, you know, we find all kinds of great birds. All right, I will stop sharing and come back. Awesome. Thank you for listening to me drone on like that. I hope it was okay.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you. And also, I think that it's important to know that, I mean, you can volunteer in the city, but you can also volunteer and be a part of the efforts at your own home, making sure that your home is bird friendly, as you mentioned, where you work, whether it's in the city or not, at school, walk around your school and see if it is that, and see if you can start a program at your school. So there are lots of ways to get involved in this this issue and being a part of the solution.
Absolutely. And I will just say, you know, if we had more volunteers, we would also be monitoring Harbor East. We know there are bird strikes there, but we just don't have the capacity to monitor more than the immediate downtown Inner Harbor. But Harbor East, you know, over where the Four Seasons is and the Whole Foods and all of that, we know that's another area that we could use. So the more volunteers we have, right, we can expand, and we'd love to do that.
And I disagree with you, Erin. You are a birder.
Well, right. Well, that's people have said that to me. Yes, I guess I am. I just don't go out into nature to look for birds. I go into densely structured neighborhoods to look for them.
But nature in the natural world is everywhere you look, even a crack in the sidewalk. So
That's
you know,
true.
there it is. Does anybody have any questions for Erin?
Yeah, I have a question. So, in the spring, when I walked around my school, I found a Canada warbler. And in the front of my school, well, I go to Folsom Middle School, if anybody knows where that is. We have huge colored windows, and on the side of them are really big, squarish, pretty big windows. And in front of the window, I found a Canada warbler. So what do you think would be the best idea for me my school?
Well, I think, you know, it depends, right? Because I don't know your specific school and, right, like how approachable your administration is, right? Your principal and the other senior leadership at the school. So you might start with, say, a science teacher who, you know, and bring the issue to their attention, right? You can, you know, you can prepare, you can look at our website, you can look at more national conservation, you know, websites for, you know, real information that references studies and things, but you could go and talk to them about it and say, hey, I would be interested, I would like to see us do something to treat the windows, right? And you could propose, right, the very low cost solutions, right, with the copium bird savers, which are the strings, or you could maybe make it a class project and say, if, you know, if the school needs time to consider the options, could we have a class project where we use tempera paint, right, and paint temporarily the window? Of course, eventually, right, as it rains, it'll wash away. But I think, you know, if you can get your teacher involved and get them excited about it, and you could make it a learning opportunity, right, for your classmates, to me, that would be the best, maybe the best idea. I will say that we have worked with schools in the past, and so Lindsay would be able, I would say email Lindsay or email just lightsoutbaltimore@gmail.com. and ask her, because we also have even gone in and done, right, where Lights Out volunteers have come to the school and done projects. We've done ones where we've cut out, right, done the cutouts, because you could also just do paper cutouts and put them on the inside of the window. As long as you do enough of them to follow the 2x4 principle, that should help as well. So I think you have lots of opportunity, lots of options for what you could do. And if you have a really responsive administration, and you maybe could go right to the principal, and it could be something that you could do for all the windows that look like they would be of risk. So that's a great question.
Yeah, I'm part of the Green School Club at my school, which is sponsored by a science teacher. And 2 years ago, we were able to put up bluebird boxes on my property.
Okay.
That, the principal and stuff would be pretty open to this idea.
Awesome. Well, see, yeah. So you've already laid the groundwork, and you have a sympathetic teacher, your club sponsor. So yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for that. I know that Lynn, again, I keep talking about Lynn. She was also an extraordinary volunteer, but she really led a lot of our art focused outreach. We've done a lot of art exhibits to call attention to this issue as well. So I know she led some of the in-classroom visits, but Lindsay would know. I'm more just, I'm your worker bee. I'm out there just looking at the windows, but they'll be able to tell you if we can assist you with those
And
efforts.
what is her email?
So it is lightsoutbaltimore @gmail.com.
Okay.
And you can also, if you go to lightsoutbaltimore.org, our website, all the contact info will be there, and some of the other info. Thanks, Bronwyn. She put it in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Copy and paste it.
Keep us updated, because we would love to see if it moves forward and you're able to do that at your school. That would be wonderful to publicize and to share with other folks so that they can do it at their school and have a whole domino effect. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And Canada warblers are such beautiful, unusual birds. Was it a male or a female? Do you know?
I think it was a male.
Yeah, so you had all those black speckles on the chest. Yeah, I have only found two, and the first was a female, and I found a male in the spring, and it kind of took my breath away. So it's such a beautiful bird, So I'm sure that was tough to find.
Any other questions for?
Yeah, I have
Ellen?
one.
Yeah, Ellen.
I'm just interested. I've never done it professionally or even studied it particularly, but I love architecture, especially old architecture, which tended to be not vast swaths of glass.
Right.
With the direction it's gone, that buildings are solid glass, I think it's ugly as can be, and it's also very bird unfriendly. Has there been any discussion with designers or architects about maybe backing off from that? Even when it's double or triple glazed, it seems like surely a glass wall is less energy efficient than a masonry or brick wall.
Well, all I can share with you is a couple anecdotal notes about that. So we have at various times, when I say we, I mean the project, right? The other volunteers, not me necessarily, but we have spoken here and there with some architects, and particularly what we're usually what happens is we're motivated, right? Because some crazy, elaborate, right, glass enclosed design will be announced for something. And then we'll be like, oh, okay, that's going to be a problem, probably, right? Because again, bird conservation treatment going into the design, it's a lot less expensive if it's built in from the beginning, right? But it is slightly more expensive than just run-of-the-mill glass, right? But when you multiply that over, right, all of the square footage, it does become a little daunting. However, interestingly, really, this issue is not about a 90-story skyscraper with birds colliding at the 85th floor, right? That is not what we're talking about. The issue is about the first 30 feet. So really, we could be focusing more and being like, no, you really only need to do the bird safe glass at ground level, right? You're on first floor, second floor. So there is that. And I personally happen to, I have a pretty good relationship with an extremely, maybe the highest profile architect in Baltimore. And I've mentioned this to him once because I know him through my day job. And so, I didn't really want to bully him with this. But yeah, you'd be surprised. They're not, I would say he was not terribly sympathetic, and it really depends. It just depends on the individual architect, right? I will say my day job our office is across the street from a well-known cultural institution in Baltimore. I won't name them necessarily, but when I describe it, maybe you'll know who it is. And they, about 10 years ago, created like a lobby that joined two buildings that they had. And for whatever reason, they put a big glass wall, and it's not tall. It's maybe 25 feet tall, but the east face is completely glass. And then they have a fountain in front of it, so the birds drown when they hit it, if they don't die on impact. And then on the backside, it's less of an issue, but they have hedges right up against it. And it turned out that really, right, the architect who designed that did not realize, and then has actually stated a ton of regret after the fact when it became clear that this was going to be an ongoing issue. So I will say, though, and I don't mean to suggest that these the building owners and the staff people, I will say they're almost uniformly sympathetic, and particularly the facilities people at the buildings we monitor downtown, right? Because they're the ones who are tasked with, right, even though it's against the law, they sweep up, if someone like us doesn't come along and collect it, they're sweeping up a carcass and it's going in the trash. And, it's an emotional thing to encounter that, when it happens frequently. So I would say, right, but like anything, right, unfortunately, in our world, these things cost money. If they're not thought of from the beginning, they cost more money. And right, business, capitalism is not altruistic at its core. And so you have to find
anti-altruistic.
Right, exactly. So you have to find the real champions, or you have to apply enough public pressure to shame people into making change. And we kind of try to stride that line into applying pressure, but not so much that you then get people who would be like, you can't set foot on our property to even monitor, right? So it's a fine line. So, but I will say a lot, particularly in Baltimore, we have, because now we've been doing this now for 13 years, 14 years. Several of the property managers are aware, they're willing, they have made changes. The city has made changes. Lights are not left on typically anymore in the convention center overnight or the visitor center overnight. So that was a long answer.
What about adding it to an architectural curriculum nationally?
Yeah, right. To train the next generation to push for it. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think that is the key. And to even talk about that, we're not talking about an entire building. We're talking about, right, this 30 feet from ground level. And also, right, that's why it's also helpful that the glass companies are continuing to invest in research and to eventually, hopefully, bring the cost down, right? If there's enough demand, it won't be so specialized. It can be mass produced, all of those things, right? Like anything, So, although why our iPhones are still so expensive, I'm not sure. But yes, that principle.
Oh, monopoly has something to do with it.
Yes. But I will say, I'm told in a lot of the glass innovation is actually happening in Europe. And and at Carnegie, they are testing the European glass. So I would say Europe is making much further strides in this than we are, but hopefully we're learning from it. But I will say, just since I've been involved, there's new programs have cropped up. The two that I specifically know of in Indianapolis and Cleveland Cleveland, of course, again, being right on the south shore of Lake Erie. I mean, they find 200 a day, whereas for us, right, like today I had 5, and that's a typical day. So imagine being in a city that was even more on a byway. And I'll just share, I went to a conference in 2015 in St. Louis, right? The Mississippi is the largest flyway in the continent. No, there is no, at least if there is now, maybe there is now. There was no program in St. Louis. There's nobody there locally doing this. And of course, I had to go do a walk one morning, and I found like over 40 birds in the neighborhood just around the hotel, you know, downtown. So it's, so when you realize it, that's like on a day, right? And then you add in the homes, because we're not going to be walking through people's yards looking at their wonderful picture windows. Yeah, it's a tremendous scale. And that's why the numbers estimates anywhere between 100 million and 1 billion birds a year just in North America. So anyway, all right. We're going over. I don't mind, but are there any other burning questions?
Yeah, if I had a question, well, 2 questions regarding light and disorientation.
Yeah.
Orioles Park keeps their lights on pretty much all night long, and it's a huge amount of light, and it just feels like, particularly for an institution around a team named after Baltimore Orioles, it's pretty absurd that they're showing that little consideration for birds, and I'm wondering if anything has been done to address that and if they've had any response. And then my second question was, I know there's growing attention to the issue of light pollution and its impact on insects in light of the global insect population decline, and I'm wondering if that is an issue that you've discussed and have any know of any mitigation strategies that can be used to address that problem.
Got it. I'll answer the second question first because that's simpler. To my knowledge, our organization isn't really talking about that. I would say, you know, as individuals, we all are pretty committed, right, to concerns, right, concerns of conservation for, you know, birds, but all the other forms of wildlife. So, but it's not anything formally we've taken up. So, but that's, you know, it's all related, right? I mean, the stressors on birds, window collisions is just one. You know, right? Habitat loss, you know, food loss, all of those things are another. To your first point about the Orioles and the park at Camden Yards, you know, it's an interesting, we have not, to my knowledge, gone one step further, right? Our efforts have been mostly focused on like dealing with specific property owners where the birds are having their fatal interaction there on site. But I can hear what you're saying with your argument. It's like, well, if that's such a huge structure, it's so lit, it's at least pulling the birds in the area, and then, but they're going right across the street, right? And then dying at the Hilton, which is where the birds are. There are not, you know, there are no planes of glass to create danger at the park itself. But so that's an interesting suggestion. I think, you know, it's just one step further for us to like kind of bite off more than we can chew, but it's definitely something I will pass along to Lindsay. I will say one thing that we did do, and it probably wasn't 100% due to our efforts, but about, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, right, the Maryland Stadium Authority announced changes for M&T Stadium, and they were going to add, similar to like the Tribute in Light, right, the World Trade Center shafts of light, they were proposing adding 6 giant beams of light around the stadium that would be on anytime there was a game, or, you know, the one big arena concert that maybe we're lucky to get a year or every 2 years. And we went to them. We actually reached out to the Maryland Stadium Authority. Lindsay had a meeting with them, and then they scrapped the plan for those lights. So, you know, occasionally we do have a good win that way. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a great suggestion, right? Like it's the light pollution in general is attracting the birds, and then that's what's bringing them in, you know, and then they're having the problem when they fly across the street, basically. So
There's other reasons to reduce light too. I mean,
well,
I used to
yes.
live 20 miles outside
Thank
of a
you.
small city and could see the stars, and they were wonderful. And I almost never see the stars in the middle of Baltimore.
Right. Well, going back right to that third slide, I mean, none of us will ever probably be able to see the night sky unless we go to Wyoming or something, you know, in the future. But yeah, no, that's a great suggestion, Adam. Thank you. I'll definitely mention that to Lindsay.
Do we have any other questions for Aaron? Aaron, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely.
And more importantly, thank you for all your walking around, and thank you for picking up the birds. I mean, we hope that we can follow in your footsteps in a small way, and join this effort, either at our homes or our schools, at our businesses, or with you out in the city. And it seems like Lights Out has had a lot of successes in educating and advocating for better design and for the birds. So thank you for all that you have been doing to help our feathered friends.
And yeah, and thank you for indulging me and letting me run over. I'm going to put 2 links in the chat in case you want to go see. We were actually glad we were on the cover of the Baltimore Sun, the front page back in November, with a great article that talked about what we do, but also why, you know, spoke to the Smithsonian, spoke to our researcher at Hopkins. And there's actually a little video. If you're a Sun subscriber, I think you can access the video. It is of me because they did go with me. So it's not really about tooting my own horn, because actually it was really hard, because it was at the end of a 3-hour walk. You know, I was red-faced and sweaty and not wearing flattering clothing. I had no idea I was going to be on video. So I really had to let go of my vanity. So I'm not giving it to you because I'm vain, trust me. And then there's also FLAP, the organization I mentioned. They just did their annual layout of their birds. And they have this amazing 7-minute, 45-second video on YouTube. That's the second link. I watched it several times because the first time I watched it, it made me tear up so much. And then I thought if I wasn't good at this today, I would show the video, and I was afraid of then being a mess. So I'm still crying from it. So it is very emotional, but I think it really gives voice to other volunteers who do this work and really puts the scale of this in perspective. And maybe a great video to share with the Green Club at school and the principal to show them about the impact of this. Okay, I'll stop talking. Obviously, I could keep going on forever. Thank you all. It was fun to be here.
Thank you, and we love your flamingo shirt.
Yes.
You noticed.
With the bird theme. So
It's the only bird nice. Shirt I have. So yes, I did. I thought about my outfit today. Thank you.
All right, well, everybody, thanks for coming, and go out, take a look at your windows, see if you can make them better, and stay out, stay curious, stay well, and I hope to see you soon at some of our programs online and maybe in person. So come pick up your free fossils on the 13th from me. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Presentation.
Thanks.